Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm going to just say a few words of welcome and turn it over to Dr. Alex Wellerstein and Dr. David Farber. But I want to welcome you to this inaugural Farber Faculty Fellowship event. This is a celebration of the College of Arts and Letters' contribution to the intellectual life of the Stevens community. This is also a celebration of the Farber Faculty Fellowship, which was established by Dr. David Farber and his late wife, Gloria, Gigi Farber. This fellowship recognizes and supports faculty in the College of Arts and Letters, Cal, who study and raise public awareness about the social impacts of scientific and technological development. And it was Dr. Farber who suggested the format of this first Farber Faculty Fellowship event, which I think is a great way to host the first one, not as a lecture, but as a discussion between the Farber Faculty Fellow, Dr. Alex Wellerstein, and between Dave Farber. So the biographies are very impressive. Dr. Farber is known as a grandfather of the internet for his impressive technological contributions to the development of the internet. Currently, he is a co-founder, co-director of the Cyber Civilization Research Center at Keio University, a founding co-director of the Cyber Civilization Research Center. Dr. Alex Wellerstein is the inaugural Farber Faculty Fellow. He's an assistant professor here in Science Technology Studies in the College of Arts and Letters, and a co-principal investigator for the Reinventing Civil Defense Project. So the title of this event is Cyberwar in a Nuclear Age and Nuclear War in a Cyber Age. And I can almost guarantee that you won't see anything like this in Hoboken today. And I can also almost guarantee that you won't find such a scary topic made so fun and interesting as by these two folks right up here. So I'm going to hand the mic over and thank you for speaking with us today.
And there are a couple seats. There's a seat over here. If you people by the door want to percolate in, feel free.
Okay, let me give a little background for why the discussion. This is an experiment also. Keio University is about to put on a set of these conversations, and so we're taking the opportunity to launch it with what I hope is an interesting, provocative topic, one that probably goes over better here than it would in Japan. For obvious reasons.
They have a little history.
They have a little history, I guess I have a set of little questions. I'm going to try to spend as much as I can hearing him as opposed to me, but I'll probably intercede. What we're going to do is hold questions until maybe 40 minutes into it, unless you feel overwhelmingly provocative. You can sort of wave your hands and maybe we'll recognize you. Start out with a question for Alex. How different are the perspectives and possibilities of cyber war and nuclear warfare in the 21st century?
So I'm not a cyber war expert. I wrote a little bit about it. You're the cyber person. But I can talk a little bit about nuclear, and maybe we can share notes or anything like that. So where are we with nuclear weapons in the 21st century? There are about as many states with nuclear weapons now as there were during the height of the Cold War. There are new states looming on the horizon who might be developing new weapons. There is all of the old Cold War problems of what if terrorists steal the material and make their own bomb and all that kind of stuff. So you've got all that old problem mixed with United States, Russia, and China are in the middle of gigantic upgrade programs in their capabilities. We appear to be in a new arms race once again, if we ever really stopped the old arms race, but we're marching onward. We are in a place where India and Pakistan are still building as many nuclear weapons as their facilities can put out. So we have regional arms races. And we're in a situation, once again, where the two major nuclear powers of the world, the United States and Russia, both between the two of them have about 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, are like not exactly friends. And in fact, not at all friends. And so what are the prospects of this going forward? I think when the 90s occurred and the Cold War ended, people thought, oh my God, whew, we're out of the woods. We don't have to worry as much anymore. We can relax our thinking about this. And I think it's really clear that that was at best a pause and at worst just like a delusion. And we're ramping onward to something new. It's not the Cold War. Russia is not the Soviet Union. They are not as big. And in one sense, that's good. And on the other sense, that means that they're in a different position. They don't have as big of a conventional force. They now have a doctrine that says we'll use tactical nuclear weapons against overwhelming conventional odds, which used to be our doctrine towards them. So where is this going to lead? I mean, not good places. So you could either, I see sort of three possibilities. How's this? One, things get really terrible. Like, historically that's always an option, though usually doesn't happen. One, we all wake up and come to our senses and it gets really great. Three, we muddle through and things are worse than they ought to be, and maybe the trend line goes either towards better or worse, but there's no quick fixes, no happy endings, and maybe if we're lucky, we don't have any more nuclear use in the next 50 to 100 years, but even that feels like a lot. So I don't know. How do you feel the cyber incident, Dave?
I think that could be a trigger. There are two things that could trigger. One is this tendency to believe that nation states are the ones who do cyber attacks. Dave Sanger wrote a book where which is getting a lot of publicity, where he said that is doctrine, that only nation states do that. So consider a possibility where, for argument's sake, the east coast of the United States power system is attacked. And, the way things are now, the most likely thing that would happen is somebody in Washington would say, the Chinese did it. How you tell that the Chinese did it is far from obvious. I attended a talk where the following scenario was proposed, which makes me believe that in fact we're in trouble with cyber being the igniter of potential. The person said, well, if China did it, what we should do is turn off China from the internet. Delete them from the domain name system. For those of you who know the technology, I have no idea in the world how you do that. If that doesn't work, disconnect them from the internet, pull the plug on you. If that doesn't work, using kinetic response. Kinetic response to a nuclear nation is a little dangerous. It could escalate quite rapidly. The other thing which could aggravate that is that nuclear is sort of, from my perspective, fallen into nobody wants to take a chance. The Herman Kahn escalation scenarios are still in people's mind. But now there's beginning to be this notion that maybe you could use small nuclear devices to destroy bunkers, deep buried bunkers with precision guided missiles. Once you do that, you make nuclear weapons, even small ones, legal, and not legal, but acceptable. And all my instincts are that that escalates faster than in the cyber situation. I think we could find ourselves triggering. And that's scary.
One thing that comes to mind with this when I think about cyber and nuclear side by side, I mean, with nuclear weapons, you kind of do need a state at some level, right? You can't make a nuclear weapon unless you have the fuel for a nuclear weapon, and the facilities to make the fuel for a nuclear weapon are state facilities. That doesn't mean you can't steal them, right? So this is the nuclear terrorist sphere. You go to a state, they have a bunch of highly enriched uranium, you take that highly enriched uranium, you go make a bomb out of it. This has occurred. Not the terrorists, thank you, it was only the Israelis. True story. Apollo affair, look it up. But you still need a state at that level. It still is difficult to pull off without large facilities. Cyber is you guys in your bedrooms with a really cool laptop rig and looking up some interesting ways of doing cool exploits and things like that. It doesn't have a massive material component. It does not really require the knowledge of the state. It could be the knowledge of a very dedicated engineering student, for example. And to me, this is a real difference between the two. In principle, you should be able to regulate nuclear weapons really well, and cyber should be really hard to regulate.
It's very difficult to regulate. There are a couple of reasons. By the way, there was an interesting article in the New York Times on hackers for hire. Essentially, there's a body of people out there all over the world who will make themselves available for hacking. To use that, I hate that term because it used to be a good term, but now it's a bad term. But the ability to have non-state actors be the attackers and maybe putting the blame on nation states, in which case you have serious problems. The other thing that complicates things, just for the record, is that, you know, when we built the internet, and there were a lot of people who built it, nobody worried about security. It was done by a small group of people, and we trusted each other. There is hardly any part of the internet and its host computers that is securable. The processors are not securable. The network itself has enough problems that it's easy to compromise it, it's easy to penetrate it. And the software we wouldn't even talk about. Let's look at the unrivaled rate of security fixes. So in fact, we're one of the tripod legs is very, very shaky and very easy to attack. And that's a dangerous thing. If that's the case, what do we do about it? That's out on my spread.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Dave.
Yeah.
What do we do about it? Okay, so here's a question I have for you. Look at this. See, that's what a pro does. It turns it back around. Do you think there's a treaty that would fix cyber problems, or regulate them, or at least put them into the domain of, you know, what's a norm and what's not, so that everybody would obey that?
That's been discussed quite a bit. We had a discussion with Dave Sang, who was over in Tokyo. That was a topic. I think we ended up in the following thing. Yeah, you could probably get a treaty that did it, and probably the United States would not sign it. Mm-hmm. Remember, we're notorious not signing treaties. And that's one we wouldn't sign based on it restricts our capabilities. That's a big problem because, you know, there's another part of the cyber world that aggravates it, and that's, we've seen the inability to control the validity of what goes on in the net. The Facebook problem, it's just endless. It's not a new problem, by the way. The false news has been around for a long, long time. If you're in the middle of the United States, you have listened to talk radio for a long, long time, and that's the closest thing to quite often fake news. But now it has much more annoying implications. And again, there's this coupling between the political reality of a country that may in fact think it's being attacked, or may not be, and the ability to retaliate in conventional, even conventional odds, can escalate quite rapidly. How many people here know about Herman Kahn's on the thermonuclear war? Yeah, not these.
Old corner over here.
Yeah, not yet. If you want to be, it's still a very relevant book. It basically went through all the escalation scenarios. One of the problems that exists right now is that there's no equivalent for it in the cyber world. There's no strategic studies I know of that have gone through the type of escalation scenarios that Herman went. We may try that around Stevens, my friend there, looking at certain aspects of it. Bradley, But there's no organized effort that I know of to look at that. And that means that we're in the dark, and we could easily slip into things.
I mean, this, Herman Kahn wrote that in 62? 60?
And then he formed the Hudson Institute.
Right. So that's 15 years after the bomb was invented, right? And I don't know when we want to claim the bomb was invented with cyber warfare. I don't know if there's a date you would say is the equivalent of 1945 or
Well,
something.
it was when Bob Morris Jr. left it, or had the first worm that escaped.
Okay, what year is that?
I remember. I don't remember. 15 years ago or something.
Okay, so we're almost at the right point.
We're about at the right point, yeah.
What I worry about is with nuclear, the doctrine took literally most of the Cold War to evolve, and it shifted. I mean, most people's conception of nuclear war doctrine is very simplified. I have nukes, so you don't nuke me, and that's that. That doesn't even evolve until about the 50s. And even then, there's a lot of caveats where the United States had plans to use nukes first, and we had tiny nukes, and we had all sorts of plans. And our sort of modern doctrine has come out of that, and even it isn't stable. Every new president comes in and issues a new nuclear policy review that slightly tweaks our approach to these things. And the current administration's, which is actually only a slight tweak on the previous one, is that they're a little more interested in the possibility of, we might use a little nuclear weapon if you do something devastating to us that is not a nuclear attack. Sort of making it a little easier to use a small yield nuclear weapon, which is already kind of disturbing that that's a little push, but even that's not a big change from what came before. If we're still working all this out on nuclear and the consequences are big, how are we going to get to a point where we can work these things out with cyber without some sort of catastrophic problem ahead of time? We don't have this is why we don't do this at the Japanese university. One of the arguments in favor of the Hiroshima attacks is that that the scientists made was this would demonstrate to the world what they need will do, right? We make these really awful, and the world will get its act together and never do it again. Is there a cyber equivalent of Hiroshima that is not actually killing hundreds of thousands of people?
Well, there's certainly one can. Yeah, I'll give you one.
Okay, great.
My favorite one is somebody penetrates. Let's take Microsoft from you, Microsoft, Apple, their update system, and propagates a serious virus worm, take your choice, which basically anybody who updates, and most people do automatic upgrades now, crashes and makes sort of nice boxes that don't do anything and cannot be recovered, which is fairly easy to do, by the way. That could cause enough of a panic, but that will cause a panic in many ways because it will not only affect people with PCs, but it will affect a lot of critical services. Notice what happened the other day when, and nobody said what it was, when the airlines basically were unable to operate because I think it was the scheduling company computer went down. This tendency to focus, to concentrate services in the hands of a small number of places, if that has problems, you've got problems. Banking systems are notoriously bad. I remember a weekend just for amusement when the ATM systems in the state of Delaware went offline. And it was an experience to watch people go around with their ATM cards trying to get money. Every machine said not working. We can escalate that. Yeah, I think we could, but worldwide, I'm not sure. It's very difficult to understand how to go about that. But let me raise another issue. The thing that makes it even potentially worse, anybody remember War Games, the movie?
Yeah.
Okay. That's getting close and closer to being feasible because now we're counting a lot on, quote, AI systems to help us make decisions. And basically we have very little knowledge of on what basis those decisions are being made. They're complex, They're not even certifiable that you can trust what comes out of it. And so that destabilizes potentially things. The next question is sort of what keeps you up at night?
Everything.
Everything.
War Games, by the way, if you haven't seen it, students, you should check it out. It's a classic one, 1983, like hardcore nostalgia mode. But it's also, it's all about questions of cybersecurity, nuclear security, their intersections, and it's based on real concerns that people have. The actual plot is for the time, was not realistic. The government turns over control of the nuclear weapons to a big mainframe, and some kid hacks the mainframe and doesn't realize he's starting nuclear war, but it's fun. And anyway, it gives you something to aspire to if you're hacking. What keeps me up at night? You know what really keeps me up at night, if I was going to say it? Not so much, whenever I talk about nuclear things or these kind of catastrophes, people's minds usually go to the worst possible scenario, right? What happens if all the nukes launch at all the times and I'm here and we're all dead? And that, you have to think about those, because if there any remote possibility of the worst case scenario, and you're talking about existential risks that end civilization as we know it, like you have to factor that into things. But I spend a lot more time trying to think about what's the most likely scenario that is not the worst case, but it's still pretty miserable. And I have like a little list of possible things, if you'd like to.
Yeah.
No, I don't actually have a list. I'm just these are just the list in my head. So if I were going to say who's the number one nuclear power most likely to use a nuclear weapon in my lifetime, I tend to think probably the United States, which is like, hot take of the year, right? But we are making the barrier for doing that much lower. And we're also, I don't think have a great, we have a system that puts all of that power literally in the hands of maybe one person, maybe at most two people, the president and maybe the head of STRATCOM and things like that. And I think if you lower that bar far enough, and you have the wrong people running the country, which by the way, this is a nonpartisan statement. If you think we've got wrong people running the country now, that's great. But don't worry, by the time you vote a few more elections from now, you'll think we have really terrifying people running the country. It's how it goes. I feel like the possibility of something small could happen. Now that wouldn't be the end of the world, we wouldn't all die, one low yield nuclear weapons goes off, we're not all necessarily launching escalation nuclear war, we're running a risk. But you are lowering the threshold, you are getting rid of a norm, and then you're into a whole new world of people saying, well, okay, if we can do it again, then why don't we do it a few more times? So I worry about that a lot these days, but I would worry about it even, say, if there's different people in charge of all the news at the moment. I would still worry that in the United States we make it way too easy. And just as a contrast, Russia makes it a little bit harder. There's another person who has to sign off on it. France makes it a little bit harder. There's actually only a couple countries that put all that power into the hands of one human being, which I think is a dangerous thing, because human beings are kind of dangerous no matter who they are. I worry about North Korea. I worry not about them deciding, like, we're going to kill you, America, and do it, but I worry that we could miscalculate with them and make them think that it's all over for them in some game of brinksmanship, and they're like, well, if it's all over, we'll take them out, because, we probably do that too. Right, there's an honor thing going on there, and again, also concentrates the power in people's hands. And I worry about India and Pakistan a lot. I mean, these are two nations that are right next to each other, have increasingly growing nuclear weapons, and they, one would always worry about them a bit. Pakistan's not super stable. India has its own domestic political issues that it's going through. But we've actually seen in the last few weeks, if you've been paying attention to the news in India and Pakistan, they're actually like using weapons against each other. They're actually, two nuclear armed powers are attacking each other and blowing things up with planes. That's not good. This is like, if you go back to your Herman Kahn escalation ladder of how you get up to terrible things, that's definitely number 2 or 3, right? We're not even at 1 anymore. We're going up the ladder. And so I worry that these kinds of situations could easily come up. And there's also the terrorism thing, which I do worry about, but I don't even know how to quantify how likely that is. So I think we should worry about that. But I see how the other things could occur trivially easy. So I do worry about that.
There's also potentially the Israeli problem, in the sense that if Israel was attacked, possibly losing, allegedly they have nuclear weapons, which I assume they do.
They do.
And,
Not alleged. It's new. We've got pictures.
I'm not sure they're using it anymore, but for a long time, the motto of the young Israelis was never again.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of instability. I think we could also have the same thing happen in cyberspace. The US is a very vulnerable target. Our infrastructure is probably much more cyber than many other countries. Many countries have managed to, through a whole set of reasons, some cultural, some just procedural, not be as dependent on cyber. Japan is a good example. Many of their operations are not critically dependent. They're much more man-intensive. Here, a lot of it is on the cyber. So a lot of our corporations are that. So we're very vulnerable that way.
I was at a talk earlier this year where a very high-ranking military official was talking about how vulnerable our nuclear command and control and communications were. And he basically said, which, take this for whatever it's worth, he basically said, we're not that vulnerable at the moment. That's because our nuclear communication systems are so old-fashioned that they can't be hacked. So it's 500 miles of copper cabling, not computers. And even the computers they do have use big floppy disks, and it's not on the internet. And he said that's great for the moment. We're actually we feel pretty confident, but that itself is its own liability. And they are in the middle of a massive upgrade over the next 20 years, where they're going to start networking everything. And they are well aware of the possibility of being attacked and intruded, and they're going to presumably design a system that's pretty resilient to that. But, it's very hard to predict the unpredictable by definition.
I remember attending a meeting, and I won't mention who it is, because it was under Chatham House rules. That means you don't attribute who said it. You can talk about it being said, but you can't identify who said it. And he was talking about the military network, and he said, well, we're going to cure the problem by having an air gap. Namely, our network will not be connected. Anyway, my comment to him was, didn't you try that 3 times in the past and it didn't work? What makes you think it will work now? I'll tell a little story to show you how vulnerable we are. One of the large aerospace companies, whose name I will again not mention, has a very classified operation. They make very, very advanced aerospace systems. And the president of the company, of the sub-company, was worried about the security of their systems, because people were bringing in flash drives. And so they propagated memos all over the place saying, never bring a flash drive, because that's a vector. It's an easy vector. It bypasses the air gap. And they decided after several letters that they would send out an experiment. They put 100 flash drives and scattered them in the parking lot. Okay? And all these drives did is report, I got plugged in. They didn't attribute who did. They attributed where it was plugged in, but they didn't know that. 75% of the flash drives were brought into the company and plugged in, even though they were warned not to do this. Of the 75% who were plugged in, 80% were plugged in by senior management. It doesn't work, guys. Now, can we fix the cyber side of the house? Not easily. It can be fixed, but in fact, many of the fixes that are out there now are basically sales gimmicks. High school kids, it will stop high school kids. It shouldn't stop any college, certainly any computer science person.
Or students.
Students, yeah. And that's dangerous. What would you recommend to policymakers?
Yeah, stop making low-yield nuclear weapons. I mean, that's an easy, obvious one. Don't lower thresholds if you're talking about nuclear. And this term we used before, which I think is a really nice term, decoupling. Slow it down. Don't make X link to Y link to Z. Make these separate systems and separate human beings. But there's a lot of things you can imagine, big scale, especially with nuclear weapons. Right? Big scale, we should start to make a new treaty with Russia, reduce the arms, and I'm in favor of all that. And there's some people who go as far as saying, let's figure out a way to get rid of all of them. Okay, down the line, right? I don't want to poo-poo that. But if I'm talking about what could you actually imagine getting passed in Congress in the next, say, 2 or 3 Congresses, depending on how elections go and things. My number one thing at the moment, it would be really nice if there was one other person other than the President of the United States who had to sign off on nuclear weapons use. Just, I don't care who. Pick a person. One of you. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Vice President. I mean, there's ups and downs to any given person. I think having a system that rests all of that power in a single human being. The funny thing is, you think that predicting the behavior of lots of human beings is difficult, but it's really not. People are pretty boring, right? You can look at averages and figure out what people are going to do on the whole. But predicting the behavior of a single human being, that's the part that's very hard to do. And I would like it if there was just one other human being in that chain. I think if you did that by itself, you'd automatically decrease the possibility of a really ill-advised nuclear weapons use, especially if you didn't have the weapons that would be quote-unquote easy to use, the low-yield ones. If going into a nuclear world means automatically jumping up that confrontation, that escalation ladder pretty significantly, that by itself probably will keep people from rushing into it headlong, hopefully. So those would be my modest, relatively workable. What do you think about cyber? What would you say if you were saying to either policymakers or, should I point out, let's say you were talking to the heads of Facebook or something like that, tech giants?
Well, that's a big problem. And in some sense, companies are structured to make profit. It's pretty obvious that for a long, long time, the way you make maximum profit is to engage more and more people. Okay? And one way to engage more and more people is to allow things like fake news, whatever your favorite vehicle is, because people react, they go online and they read. Notice, by the way, that Yale journalism, which has been around for a long, long time, used the same basic thing. We entered a war in the Spanish-American War because I forget which newspaper it was, probably the Hearst newspaper, was drumming up the drums and basically saying false information and stirring up the pot. So it's hard to see how you control it and not throw the Constitution away. That can yield actually a very dangerous thing in my mind, and you have to balance, danger versus benefit. What we're pushing more and more companies into is to be the censors. And just for the record, freedom of speech does not apply to companies. It doesn't apply to that's a federal issue. Right? You're guaranteed your rights to speak under the Constitution doesn't apply to a company. They can censor in any way they want. And you have no legal recourse that I know of. Maybe some states have it, but even that probably is not the case. That's hard. As I mentioned before, there have been endless proposals for international laws. There have been endless proposals for responsibility for treaties that basically said that people in the profession should not do things which are that could cause damage to society. It's very hard to enforce those. It's very hard to make them work. The only way I know is for the public to essentially say, if you continue to behave that way, I'll leave. Essentially take away the market. And that doesn't seem to happen. It hasn't happened in the past, there's no reason it would happen now. So and the coupling of those two is what worries me a lot. The other thing we could do, which I leave to future generations, is to actually redo our basic technology so we're not as vulnerable. The systems we have are incredibly vulnerable. And there are ways of making it better. It's not going to help the person who has the machine out there, but critical things like banking power. The power systems are incredibly weak. And again, these things can be motivators. The East Coast goes black, what would Washington do? The first thing you'd see on Facebook is the Chinese did it. Or take a particular favorite boogeyman at that point. What would a politician have to do? Almost any politician would have, especially the current one. It's not clear, and that's what's dangerous about that. So, do you sleep well at night?
No, totally medicated. I didn't think I sleep at all.
But we're going to have to fix it because I think the odds are too high that in fact somebody's going to press the button. It may not be in the United States, it may be. And by the way, when Alex talked about having multiple people pushing the button, I think you want to have that mostly to defend against a first attack decision, where you worry that in fact, you're pissed off, you've had it, and you're going to get rid of that country. If you see missiles coming over and you can trust the reports, you probably don't want to negotiate. We can have a discussion.
Yeah, it depends. Depends on the situation. If it's one missile, maybe you don't want to. Like there's a limit. Certainly, if all the missiles are coming, then you send all of yours.
Yeah, I was about to. By the way, just terminating that. There have been several situations in the past where people had test data, and actually people thought that there was an attack. And luckily somebody had the sanity to sort of look at the newspapers and say, how would they do this? Yeah, I think it's a good time to open. If we haven't scared all of you.
Yes, what's the bad news?
Yeah.
Dave, thank you. I'm Mark Stallman, the president of the Center for the Study of Digital Life. I have a question, probably for both of you. A week ago, the Committee on Present Danger China was launched, and James Woolsey, past head of CIA, got up and made a very big deal, did some others, about PRP, which is kind of a combination, in a sense. So these pulse weapons, in the particular scenario that he was describing, was a satellite, Chinese satellite, detonated above the United States, immobilizing. And I know this has been a concern within the nuclear community, particularly over the course of the past 5 years since I've intersected it. What do we do about that?
EMP.
Electromagnetic pulse.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Both to our satellites potentially, done the right way, but also to the ground systems. And by the way, you can get a confusion because a bad solar storm can essentially have a similar impact. So you have to be very careful when you do see that effect, that it's actually somebody attacking you rather than the sun, because we don't predict very well. But there are ways of hardening those things. They're not very inexpensive, and they're not very well. Yeah, a pulse, an EMP would probably bring down most of our financial system. There's also neutron bombs, remember those, which just kill people, they don't damage property. They're all, I'll tell you one thing you can do, which to encourage China to get in the same position we're in, and as be vulnerable against being attacked the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't worry that much about EMP. EMP is a big. There are groups in the U.S. in particular who are like really spooked by EMP and have been like beat the EMP threat drum. And the basic, it's usually people on kind of on the far right who want to worry about this, which I have to admit I don't 100% know what they're trying to get out of this. But the basic idea is with one little nuke or satellite, the United States should be plunged into darkness and chaos because they take out our electrical grid. And the science of EMP that's unclassified, that I can see, is kind of ambiguous about like, well, what would the effect be? It's not that easy to model. It's easy if you to mark where these pulses are likely to go, but it's hard to say, okay, it's going to get attenuated by the roof, and it's going to be at an angle, and your thing's in a pocket, and your cell phone has this in it, and how much is it going to pick up, and how much is it going to burn? And you can come up with models that people have, and generally the ones that I find most responsible are like, well, that wouldn't be very good. That would be pretty bad. Would everything stop completely? Not clear, right? The reason I don't worry about it is most of all the EMPs that we're really worried about are caused by setting off a nuclear weapon in the upper atmosphere. And if China sets off a nuke above the United States, like, don't worry about the EMP, worry about the other nukes that are probably right behind it, right? Like, they're not gonna do that like on a Wednesday, right? Like, hey, let's shut down the US grid by setting off a nuclear weapon above. Like, that's a crazy activity. They would only do that in a really bad situation. They also know, because we're very public about it, our nuclear retaliatory systems are EMP hardened. We've had that be a concern since the 60s and the 70s. So we'll be able to shoot them back. So I don't worry about it that much because it's one of those things like, it's about the same likelihood as China deciding to just take out New York. Like, why would they do that? That would kill them, right? Like, I don't see that as being a China thing. China, by the way, not that I trust the Chinese nuclear people or whatever, they have a very limited nuclear arsenal relative to us, and it's very deliberate. They could have a much larger arsenal. They have about 270 nuclear weapons. We have, as one military guy put it really quickly, 1,550. 1,550, it's not easy to remember when you say it that way. We have like 1,550 ready to go. We have more that are in like stockpiles and things like that. They could have 1,000 nuclear weapons. They deliberately hold back so that they have what looks like a posture that says, if you don't nuke us, we won't nuke you back. And so to me, like, I don't worry about China doing that. I don't even worry about Iran or any of these other countries, North Korea, doing that. If they're gonna shoot a nuke at us, they're not gonna like set it off in the upper atmosphere with the hope that they disrupt our cell network. They're gonna aim at cities because they can't miss. And if we've gone down that path, like, we've already gone off the rails. So for me, it's like, don't worry about EMP, worry about the nukes. And again, just to get back to, I'm not sure what these people want. I'm never really sure what the people who push for the EMP stuff are trying to get out of it. They're not usually arguing for an overhaul of our electrical grid, which would actually be okay. I'd be in favor of that. We do need an overhaul of our electrical grid. We totally could use an upgrade. It hasn't been upgraded for a long time. If they want to do it under the bastion of security, okay, fine. But like, I don't really get what they're trying to get out of it usually, except for be afraid that even though North Korea only has 10 nuclear weapons, they could take down our whole grid, which doesn't strike me as a true, but also be like, we have 1,000 times more nuclear weapons than North Korea does. They're not going to nuke us unless they think it's over.
Unless we push it to the edge.
Right, if they think it's over, sure, they'll do it. But again, I don't think they're going to waste one of their 10 weapons
No, they wouldn't.
on the hypothetical on the EMP, which is again very hard to model, huge uncertainty bars around. You know, wouldn't be great. Happy to say that, but I think I don't worry about that as much. That's not on my list.
We good? Now, come on. There, okay. Well, and then,
This is a hard question. So, what are the 6 or supposedly irrelevant factors that, so there are certain things that you think about when you think about cyber, you think about nuclear, like you might think about the electricity grid, but are there any factors that are adjacent to these systems that are worrisome, that are not part, that would not be considered relevant to directly the discussion of either one. Does that make sense?
Sure. Here, let me give you an example. Ready? Ready? It's going to be controversial. Ready? Fox and Friends. Okay, we know that the current president gets a lot of his news from one television show, and it unduly influences his behavior throughout the day. Now that's weird, it's historically anomalous. I can't think of anything similar to it where you have a president who very clearly sees a television show, they say some kind of whatever, and then he immediately pivots and turns that into like action. This is the kind of thing that the generals, I don't think about. They're not sitting there thinking, what will the impact of Fox and Friends be on the escalation ladder? But they should, because if something goes wrong weird with China, or the grid goes down, and the people on Fox and Friends get up there and say, I bet it was China, you know, the only way a real man would respond is by nuking XYZ, will that influence the situation? I'm just making this up, obviously, but this is what I mean by the sorts of things that do not fit into any of the command and control discourse. The influence of Twitter, the influence of things, if you have a president, and again, it doesn't have to be this president, it could be a different person in there. You could go to Obama. How dependent is Obama on the smartphones that he has for the information and the decisions he makes? Are those vectors, right? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. These kinds of little incidental things that are connected to human beings are a problem when you amplify human beings in this system. So if there was like a committee that had to agree, you wouldn't worry about Fox and Friends at all. Who cares if one guy in the committee gets this bad information? But if it's a single human being that has to agree, then suddenly you open up all these potential vectors for influence and attack and things like that, which is, to me, again, further evidence that you should have a single human being involved, no matter who the human being is. Again, I'm just using a contemporary example because it's so amusing. But, like, you can find similar vectors for probably lots of people. You know, the Reagan administration famously went to fortune tellers, right? There's variations on the human factor that is often not, you know, did the Soviets take the fortune tellers into their calculations on the possibility of nuclear war? Probably not. Should they? Maybe.
Yeah, and you know, a favorite trick of political things is when it becomes stressful, start a war. I think there was a real question with Nixon of whether he played that when he got to the edge. It turned out he didn't, but you know, he could have. It's fairly consistent tendency to do that.
Can I throw one more wrinkle into this?
Yeah.
Let's imagine you think Fox and Friends is great and they would never do something ridiculous. Okay, fine. Could you hack Fox and Friends? Could you replace them with really good fakes? We're not quite there yet, but we're pretty close to that technology, deepfake stuff type things. Could you have a special deepfake hack of Fox and Friends that's designed to hack the brain of the president? Would his advisors be able to convince him that this was the case? Again, this is totally sci-fi nonsense territory. Again, this is what I mean by this being, these kinds of human factors being a vector, that if you're another state, do they pay attention to these things sometimes if they're trying to influence? We know they do. We know we do it too. Look at those WikiLeaks State Department files, and they are all about how American diplomats are looking for the vector to like influence the guy who's the vice minister of X into agreeing to your project or whatever it is. So, again, if you concentrate on individual humans, you have unlimited vectors practically.
We'll go back.
We should be more concerned about cyber attacks, like private companies or the U.S. government, and then going with that, who's better like protected and prepared, and which would be more catastrophic.
We should do I worry more about government than
Like government or getting hacked or like Apple getting hacked.
getting hacked?
Yeah,
Okay, not being the hackers.
yeah, right.
No, again, it depends on, for instance, if I could hack Apple and get at their updates, their update mechanism, I could do an incredible amount of damage. And it would be very hard to get too attributed to an individual. So it could be a high school kid who, I doubt that, but it doesn't take magic there. And we've seen that happen with one manufacturer already. Government, I think, is diverse enough so that less about it. Although again, if what you're doing to government is injecting bad information into it, you may be able to inject information which causes them to react in ways that you want them to react that are not wise.
And just to probe a little, I wonder how much it's the interface that we worry about. I've been reading a lot of this news about this, what's the Chinese company, Huawei? I clearly never said the name now until
Huawei.
Huawei. Thank you, Professor McPhail, who actually speaks Chinese. And there's a lot of concern right now because governments across the country, across the world, excuse me, are relying on them for a lot of telecommunication infrastructure and computers. And the U.S. has been saying, please don't do this. They are like basically the Chinese state. You are putting all of your telecommunications in the hands of the Chinese state. I just got back from Mexico City, and every ad for every thing was for Huawei. It was like, Huawei, the best way to do calling in Mexico. And I thought, I can see why they're nervous. And they put up, apparently, I saw some little thing about this, they're putting up cell towers even in the U.S. for these Huaweis, and they're actually worried that they're putting them up near ICBM bases. And that they're going to be able to do all sorts of weird things in there. So this is my question about, is it right to even separate it into government versus private?
Let me take that particular case.
And to be fair, I don't know anything about Huawei, right? Like two
But there are ways around that. Some of them might be difficult, but embedding things in the chip, which basically is the thing they worry about, is not as simple as it sounds. You can decompile the chip fairly easily. You really should have permission to do it, but that can be a requirement of selling. In fact, they open up the chip internal design and maybe even manufacture it here with royalties going to them because the profit royalties. There are things you could do. I think there's also no guarantee that we aren't doing the same thing.
That's probably what we're worried about.
Yeah.
Is it still the case that the Chinese will not allow an Intel trusted security module in their PCs?
Yes, for good reason. I can tell you, no, I won't tell that. But we have no guarantees that what are in our protected stuff doesn't have the same. In fact, most likely it does. And so, mutual destruction, yes, sir.
This is very depressing, and I'm glad there's alcohol afterwards to make all the difference for me. My question really is, why aren't people more worried about this? And I say this as someone from the duck and cover generation, where the threat of nuclear annihilation hung over a whole bloody generation, and then with the fall of the Berlin Wall and in the Soviet Union, it all disappeared, and I felt great. What I'm hearing from you and what Daniel Ellsberg has been writing about is not only do we still face that, we face all this other stuff, now mixed in with cyber. But I don't think anybody cares, and I want to know why.
That's correct. Ignorance is bliss. That's not correct. One of the things that Brad and I are trying to do in a research project is to make some of this thing aware. We're calling the project Silent Spring, with an aim towards the book that popularized the environmental history, trying to get the public to understand the reality of what's there. And believe me, it's not just the United States. I've been living in Japan now for 10 months. There's massive denial there also. I think that people just don't want to have to face it, but I think it's necessary to face it. When Kahn wrote his book, when Herman wrote his book, every church in the country cursed him for thinking about such a thing. And I remember Herman's comment back then was to not think about it is the serious thing. Not to think about it is serious.
And I'll just say, I'll plug the Civil Defense, Reinventing Civil Defense Project, which I'm working on with Professor Carl, who's back there as well. And But the goal of this project is to figure out how to maybe get people to think about these things. And the answer isn't you just get up and give a lecture and they start thinking about it. And it isn't you write an op-ed and they start thinking about it. And it isn't, that's not why you were thinking about nuclear weapons in the 1960s and 70s. Our sort of working thesis, among other things, is that you mentioned you're of the duck and cover generation. It's that you start pretty early in telling people what the facts are. And don't just tell them, good luck. You tell them, hey, hide under your desk, that'll help. Now, maybe that doesn't help, maybe it does. There's a whole complicated conversation we can have about whether that helps or not, but it gets you taken seriously. In the same way that earthquake drills, how many of you did active shooter drills, right? These kinds of things have big impacts on how you think about the world you live in and what's a likely risk and what you can ignore. How do you do that? I don't know. That's the goal of the project. We're going to have a big event here in early August. If you want to come, we're all welcome to come just before school starts. We'll have some of the results, and there'll be cool stuff for you to do and play and put on your heads and things like that. It'll be really fun. Yeah, but anyway, this is like an open question.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Thank you. We talked about imagining the worst case scenario a la Hiroshima. So I'm thinking back to a couple of years ago with the Equifax breach. And around the same time, the UK medical system, the hospital system, was seriously compromised for a relatively long time. What's it going to take, really, for the world to stand up? And in Europe, they have certain privacy regulations now that are really quite robust. But, again, we hate to think about the unthinkable.
Yeah, the headache is that there's a large number of people who believe that if you come out with a standard for treating it, that the problem is solved. And to a degree, the Europeans are doing that. Where you put a framework and you say, that solves the problem, but in fact it doesn't. It doesn't solve for a whole set of reasons. The right to be forgotten is sort of a weird thing. I'm not sure how you find where it is. It's hard to forget on the internet. I think people have to be concerned, and they're not concerned right now. The comment that says, that people just are not worrying about it, and they should.
And with cyber stuff, I think people are really not paying attention also. There's actually lots of great journalism about some of these major attacks. There was a big one a little over a year ago, NotPetya, that crippled, I don't know if it was the one that crippled the UK medical system, but it might have been. It started in Ukraine and then it crippled just some huge percentage of global shipping. Cost $300 million globally to repair it. If things had gone a little bit wrong, it would have cost even more money to repair the global shipping. They would recover some of the database. This outpost had gone out. Like, there's all this crazy story. Wired is a great story about it. And this is one of those things where I read it, and I thought, why have I never heard of this before? Like, why am I learning about this from Wired magazine a year later? Why wasn't this why didn't I see it in the newspapers? And maybe it's because I don't have time to read the newspapers, because reading the news is a horrific, stressful experience, and I don't do it as much as I ought to anymore. But these things keep happening. And then you go and tell somebody, oh, did you know about the time in which this happened? People say, I've never heard of that. I think, okay, something isn't getting through where these attacks are happening really regularly, and they are actually impacting your lives to a degree that in some cases you're probably inured. I mean, how many people have got an email that said, hi, we're from some institution, and unfortunately our records were compromised. Don't worry, we'll keep an eye on whether your credit card got stolen, but we lost 2 trillion records this time. But don't worry, it's fine, keep shopping with us. And then you go, you freak out for about 5 minutes, and you think about putting a hold on your credit card, and then you forget, and now here we are.
I don't know.
I want to raise another problem from the perspective of the journalist. I haven't written much about cybersecurity, but I've had some people come here and give talks on it. And a lot of the coverage I've seen, the experts who are quoted have a vested interest in scaring people about cyber attacks. They have consulting companies, or they're promoting a book and this kind of thing. And most of what's really going on is classified or it's criminal, and so journalists are relying a lot on trusted experts. who might actually have an ulterior motive. So I'm worried that, instead of the threat being ignored, and in some cases, it's being hyped up by people who want more money spent on this, and that this actually might fuel an arms race.
Yeah, well, it's certainly happening. If you look at the huge market for, what do they call it, essentially the software you put in to catch viruses.
Yeah,
Antivirus. Almost none of those are worth money. They don't work. They protect against high school kids. High school kids are not the problem. But boy, there's a lot of money to be made there. Companies, good, substantial companies have paid billions of dollars to buy companies that were selling garbage. Part of it is that the public has no understanding what the issues are. And there's also I'm gonna hate myself when I say it, there's no professional obligation. If the medical people, if a lawyer or a doctor behave the same, they'd be disbarred or they'd have their licenses taken away. We don't do that. In fact, probably a person who can convince people to spend a lot of money gets a big raise. Right? I'm not sure what the hell to do about that. Again, the more we can get out the facts, the better off we are. And by the way, academia is not innocent. And I've sat in on a lot of NSF meetings where basically the people were saying, oh, we're going to do marvelous things, just give us money. And you sit back there and say, in the security area, you can do things in other areas. The security is real hard, and I don't know how to do it. I think we're at the magic hour where
Reception. Yeah, there's a reception on the 4th floor of Babio, just above us. Take the elevator up or the stairs if you're feeling athletic. And there's probably little shrimps and things like that. So, are there little shrimps?
No, we didn't order the shrimps.
Oh. Well, there's other shrimp equivalents
no sushi
up there. But thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.